Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make. Hello and welcome back to my world of stuff on Halloween. It's officially Halloween. You are entitled now to enjoy your Halloween because it's tonight. It's not a season. It's not a week. It's tonight. So you get out there and do what you got to do. If you're not doing anything, you might want to listen to me talking about Count Dracula. From 1977, the classic BBC Prestige production starring Louis Jourdan. Before we do that though, welcome to my world of stuff. If you are new here, my name, Paul Mount. Why not like and subscribe to the channel in this spooky season? Loads of horror and Doctor Who and unboxings and videos about classic horror, classic TV, classic, everything. So like and subscribe to the channel. You can do it by clicking that. You can click that QR code with your phone and you will be drawn into my web of stuff forevermore. So I thought I would do something for Halloween because, as I've mentioned, I'm not a big Halloween person. I feel Halloween is a few hours on the 31st of October. And people do go nuts all through October about it. And that's absolutely fine, I suppose. But for me, it's Halloween is the 31st of October. But I thought I would do something for the night itself. And what better creature of the night to talk about than the legendary Count Dracula, based on Bram Stoker's classic Gothic novel. And the version I'm talking about, as I said, is the 1977 BBC Prestige version, which, as many of you may know, was the reason that Doctor Who's Vampire Mutations, which was due to kick off the 15th season, story written by Terence Dicks, was shelved because the BBC felt that they were spending a lot of money on a presumably quite big budget version of Dracula. They didn't want Doctor Who creeping in a few months earlier and stealing their thunder. Whether they thought Doctor Who was going to take the mickey out of vampires, I don't really know. I wouldn't have thought so because at this point in Doctor Who's history, it hadn't yet drifted into the slightly silly knockabout humour that would come along a couple of years later when Tom Baker was off the reins and was indulging himself in being silly and taking control of the series. He was still quite serious and intense at the time, and Doctor Who was still in its Philip Hinchcliffe-ish sort of gothic period itself. So I don't think Doctor Who doing vampires would have been camp and silly and comedic. But I suppose you can understand the BBC worrying that they were doing Dracula and a few months earlier Doctor Who had done its own take on vampires. So I suppose it's understandable that they asked the production team if they could sort of do something else. And of course, as a result, we got the wonderful horror of Fang Rock. Don't forget to check out my retro Doctor Who review of that further back down the channel. Chef's Kiss Doctor Who. So the BBC's version of Count Dracula aired in one big 2+ hour chunk on the 22nd of December 1977 on BBC Two. It was screened intermittently several times after that, split into different chunks. And in fact, on the DVD edition, it's split into two chunks. I think the first one's about 70 minutes, the second one about 80 minutes. It's a big old chunky production. And it is probably the most faithful version of Dracula that's ever been made. I mean, Dracula is ripe for reinterpretation in all sorts of ways. We had the classic Bela Lugosi version from Universal in the 1930s. Then, of course, Hammer reinvented the character in 1958 with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee playing Dracula, which spawned a series of films that ran until the 70s, increasingly weird Dracula films that took the character and the series in a totally different direction. And there have been umpteen versions ever since. BBC did another version years after this one, starring Mark Warren, which was a bit sort of trippy. And then Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss got their fangs into the character a few years ago for a frankly disastrous 3-part take that did what Stephen Moffat tends to do and just is all over the place. The thing about the Dracula story is there is so much potential in that story. There's so many different ways you can go. I mean, certainly Horror of Dracula, the Hammer version, is considered one of the definitive versions, but if you watch it now, there's a lot of stuff that's not in it from the book. It has the core story, which of course is Jonathan Harker, the solicitor, travelling to Castle Dracula in Romania to meet up with the mysterious Count to finish off a house purchase and to deal with some administrative matters. he gets trapped in the castle and discovers who Dracula really is. Dracula's baleful influence then extends across Europe to Jonathan Harker's homeland. Many stories have lifted bits and left bits out and put new bits in. I think that's the fluidity of the story and the character. But as a traditionalist and a purist and a completist, I want to see the Dracula story as I know it from having read the book. Now, when I saw this in 1977, I hadn't yet read the book. I knew Dracula from the Hammer films, the Universal films, and various odds and sods. I only read the book within the last 20 years, I think, and it's a terrific book. It's very dense, but it's very gripping. It is classic Gothic horror, and it's one I've been meaning to reread many times. I've got so many different editions of it. I picked up this really nice leather-bound, embossed version just last year, and that may be some winter reading for me, although I've missed Halloween, unfortunately. But what I like about the 1977 version is that there was very clearly an intent to tell the story pretty much as it is in the book. There are diversions here and there. The end is slightly different in its construction, but it gets to the same place. But it is extremely faithful and rigorously follows the text, which is sort of what you want with a story like this. As I said, there's so much you can do with Dracula, but sometimes it's nice to go back to basics and tell the story as it is. And that's exactly what this does. It starts off with Jonathan Harker, played by Bosco Hogan, leaving his family, his fiancée, Mina, played here by Judy Bowker, and travelling to Romania to meet up with Dracula. He goes missing after an extended period. Dracula makes his way to Whitby. There is actually some very atmospheric location filming in Whitby, which very cleverly avoids showing any 1970s affectations to the houses just by focusing on long shot of the girls running up the steps towards the Abbey and some nice framing sequences. Lucy Westenra starting to fall ill. She's played here by Susan Penhaligon. She starts to fall ill when she falls victim to Dracula's attentions. The arrival of Dr. Van Helsing, played by Frank Finlay, who, incidentally, had been working with Susan Penhaligon in an ITV serial called A Bouquet of Barbed Wire. So this was a very quick reunion for the two of them. It follows the whole line of the story. And if you're familiar with the story, then you know where it's going. And it's really nice to see key moments from the book brought to life. We have Renfield, played brilliantly here by Jack Shepherd, who's a complete maniac. He really is Dracula's servant. We see him in his cell in the institution where he's locked up and being observed by Dr. Seward. And he's catching flies and he wants to catch spiders and he wants a kitten. And his performance is very jittery and very jumpy and very nervy. And it's classic Renfield if you think of Nicholas Holt's performance in the Renfield film we had a couple of years ago. Amusing as that was, this is much more Renfield as written in the text. And the whole production drips the atmosphere of the period. It is totally engrossing in the way it tells the story and moves the story forward. It's all here. Louis Jourdan plays Dracula. An odd and unusual choice, being a French film and television actor. He was born in 1921 and he was very much a suave, sophisticated gentleman in film appearances. Very suave actor, but not a classic Dracula type, you might think. Now, I think of Dracula and I think of Christopher Lee. He had that long, angular, animalistic look to him. He looked like an undead creature. Louis Jourdan looks like somebody who's just stepped out of a wine bar. However, he does bring it a certain malevolence. He's sophisticated and he's plausible. But there's a malevolence hidden behind that look that he has. The director of this production, Philip Saville, said at the time, Dracula's a romantic, sexually dashing anti-hero in the tradition of those figures usually dreamed up by women. Rochester, Heathcliff, figures that can overpower a strong heroine, inhuman figures that can't be civilized. And Louis Jourdan himself said that he's an angel, a fallen angel. I think Dracula should be played as an extremely kind person who truly believes he is doing good. He gives eternal life. He takes blood and he gives blood. Therefore, he gives an exchange which is symbolic of love and a sexual act. I think it's interesting that neither of them see him as a monster. They see him as, in Jourdan's case, somebody who gives people the gift of eternal life. And Philip Saville sees him as almost the ultimate romantic figure. Somebody who sweeps women off their feet, is charming and debonair, almost inhumanly romantic. And that comes across very much in his look. Because you look at him on screen and he is very much a far cry from, say, Nosferatu in Robert Eggers' recent film, who's this misshapen monster. Here he looks very much like a member of the aristocracy. He's got the smart suits and the cloaks, and when he meets Jonathan Harker, he's very pleasant to him and offers him help, warns him off certain places in the castle that he can't go, but he plays him very much as somebody who is doing, as Jourdan says himself, what he thinks is right. He doesn't see himself as evil. He sees himself as somebody who has a part to play in giving his gift of immortality to his victims. This is a fine, authentic production of Count Dracula. It does everything you want it to do in terms of adapting the book for the screen. But by God, it's dated. I watched this a couple of nights ago in a blitz watching the 2 episodes, and I was enthralled by it because it is a very handsome production, and I love the story and I love the idea of Dracula, but it's very much of its time. On this channel I watch a lot of classic TV, and you always have to make allowances for different production styles and the ethos of the time that these things were made. And whether it's the fact that this is a gothic horror story from the 19th century, or the fact that we're looking at a BBC production from 1977, it is quite static and stagey in many ways. There's certain elements of pace, particularly in the final scene, which has a sort of gun battle between Van Helsing and his chums and some Slovaks who are trying to get Dracula back to the castle. But it is very stagey and very slow-paced, and the direction is very, very static. The script was written by Gerald Savory. He was 68 at the time when he wrote the script for this, and I think that shows in that it is very much a period piece that is very dialogue heavy, that is very, although atmospheric, it's very measured. He's not updated anything, which is fine. You don't want the dialogue and the nuances of the characters updated, but it feels very much like a BBC period drama from the 70s with a vampire thrown into the mix. The direction by Philip Saville is so unimaginative. If you think of modern productions, the cameras are swooping and they're drone shots and the cameras are dashing around. This is very flat in that the camera's looking at people and they talk and then it moves to another scene. There's no imaginative direction. There's no swooping shots. There's no overhead shots of a few. It's very flatly done, and it's very uninspired, the direction. It doesn't lift it off the screen in the way a story like this deserves to be lifted off the screen. I was also disappointed, and I remember being disappointed in 1977 when I watched it, because this is a big, prestigious BBC production, but it is still a mix of film and videotape. It starts off with some nice film sequences with Jonathan Harker saying goodbye to his family, heading across to Europe, and then all of a sudden when he gets into Castle Dracula, oh, we're in BBC Television Centre Studios again. It has that switch from film to studio videotape. And whilst, as I've said before, it gives it an immediacy, you do notice the difference in the production style. Suddenly you realise that you're being wrenched back into BBC television studios in the 1970s, with the inevitable effect that as these are studio sets, people are walking around stone castles, clumping about on wood, because the sets are made of wood. But I think the lighting helps. It's certainly rich, darker tones to sort of show us parts of the castle. It's a BBC period production, so the detail is fantastic on the sets. Set dressing is superb. But it does wrench you out of the filmic feel that you have at the beginning when you're suddenly back in the BBC studios. Something else that wrenched me out of it, unfortunately, were the video effects, which are so jarring in terms of you're telling a gothic story and recreating the feel of the late 19th century or the early 20th century. And all of a sudden you've got these video effects, which quite frankly look like camera tests for Top of the Pops, where Dracula is in profile or he turns, and then you've got this effect where he's bright red, they've glossed out his eyes, and this quite primitive chroma key effects that the BBC was still using at the time. And it tears you right out of the story, because all of a sudden you're watching a BBC video effect, and it happens a lot throughout the story. There are several scenes where Dracula's bleached red or bleached blue, and it just tears you out of it because you're just realising, oh, that's a BBC video effect. Other visual effects are what they are. There's sequences with the bat, which is quite clearly a bat on a piece of string. But there are other bits which are very well done. The scenes where Dracula manifests as smoke or manifests from smoke, and that's quite well done, with smoke pouring into Mina's bedroom and then appearing as Dracula over her. And the scenes, unfortunately, in Dracula's castle, where Jonathan Harker looks out of the window and sees Dracula crawling down the castle, they look very odd indeed, because he appears to be sort of flattened out on the wall, and Louis Jourdan is sort of looking around as he sort of bumps down the wall. Doesn't look fantastic. So these are things which tear me out of it. The fact that it is a very much a BBC production. It would have been nice if it had all been on film and looked slick. And I think that would have given the direction a bit more edge, because I think multi-camera in the studio makes it appear clunkier than it needed to be when it could have been much better done single camera on film. I think that would have given it a bit more pace and energy, as Graham Harper might say. Beyond that, though, it is a very good production. I mean, it takes its time. It isn't hurried. It goes through the book as it needs to, and it tells the story in the book. And the performances are generally excellent. Bosco Hogan, an Irish actor, who I'm not very familiar with. He did this, and he did lots of other work, but this was a really good performance here as Jonathan Harker. And you sort of forget when Harker disappears. He does reappear. He's found later on in the story. He comes back and he is aware of the threat of Dracula. Frank Finlay is superb as Van Helsing. The girls, Susan Penhaligon and particularly Judy Bowker, are both excellent. They're sort of the main cast, and Jack Shepherd as Renfield. I think if there's a Duff performance, the only one really is Richard Barnes, who plays Quincy P. Homewood. Fortunately, he's not in it very much. I think he was more of a singer than an actor, and his delivery isn't as confident as the rest of the cast, but that's a very minor criticism. All in all, it is a really good production, which shows its age. That's the problem. It is one of those that you watch it and you are aware of how different television production is these days, and how the pace of television is different these days. I'm glad it's got the pace it's got, because I don't like to see the Dracula story hurried, because there's a lot to it. The scenes on the Demeter are dealt with quite nicely here. There's a very worthwhile attempt at showing the Demeter on the sea and the bodies on board the ship. So it does everything that you want a Dracula story to do, which is why it's nearly 3 hours long. But it's certainly not a waste of time watching it. I think you will watch it and you will think, yeah, this is dated. This is from 1977, very clearly from 1977, because television is so different today. But that's not a reason to criticise old television. In some ways, it's a reason to embrace old television, because much as there is great TV out there today, it doesn't half rush along and it doesn't pause for thought very often. And I think when you're doing something like Dracula, you need those little moments to sort of reflect and let the tension build and let the creeping threat of Dracula envelop you like Dracula's cloak. So, highly recommended. It's a terrific piece of television, but it is of its time, and you will undoubtedly be conscious of that if you watch it. You've never seen it before. You can still get it. The DVD has never gone out of print. You can still pick it up quite cheaply from Amazon, probably even cheaper on eBay. And if you've never seen it, it is well worth looking at. Probably the most faithful version of Stoker's quite difficult to adapt novel. I can understand why various people who made it over the years have jettisoned bits, because the narrative moves around quite a lot and there are diversions and different bits and pieces here and there. And this really makes a good attempt at keeping it moving, albeit at quite a slow pace. So that's Count Dracula, the BBC 1977 production, which, although it's too late for you to watch it on Halloween, if you haven't got it already, if you have got a copy of it, I would suggest digging it out, because it's very, very good, but it is of its time. That's Count Dracula from the BBC, which gets an 8 out of 10 for me, because it's very good. Right, thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope you've enjoyed the rest of your Halloween activities. We can put that all away now for another year, forgetting about the Halloween season. Ah, bless. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope it's provided some Halloween diversion for you. And I hope it brings the spooky season to a suitable end without too much blood being spilt. Let me know, leave a comment down below if you've seen this version of Count Dracula, where it fits in your Dracula rankings of your favourite adaptations of the story and your favourite incarnations of Dracula. I would love to hear from you, as always. So I will leave it there. I will see you soon. Don't forget, like and subscribe, leave a comment and all that stuff I've already said. I will see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.